Mr. Auchincloss.
Thank you, Chairman. There's clear bipartisan consensus on this committee that we need to be in a position of strength relative to the Chinese Communist Party. Xi Jinping and his Politburo recognize strength above all else, but there's a concerning false equivalence that I'm hearing between diplomacy and weakness, and it misunderstands the nature of when to engage with an adversary. Secretary Blinken, Secretary Yellen are landing in Beijing in a position of strength, and that is why it's time to talk. Dr. Ratner, would you say that over the last 2 years, because of our actions in arming Taiwan, because of our agreement with AUKUS, because of our freedom of navigation maneuvers in the South China Sea, because of Force Redesign 2030, led by the Marine Corps, that we are militarily stronger in the Indo-Pacific than we were?
Absolutely, Congressman.
And would you say that because President Biden has rallied NATO to support and defend Ukraine, fighting on the front lines of the free world against Vladimir Putin, that we are stronger in the Indo-Pacific as well as in Europe?
Yes, I think our actions in Europe have strengthened deterrence in the Indo-Pacific.
And do you think Xi Jinping is watching what happens in Ukraine?
I think he's watching very closely.
And what would happen if under a different administration we were to cut and run from Ukraine?
Congressman, I don't want to speculate, but just to reiterate the point, I do think our support for Ukraine and our ability to rally the international community has strengthened deterrence in the Indo-Pacific.
And Mr. Crittenberg, do you think that we are stronger relative to where we were 2 years ago in terms of our multilateral and bilateral alliances in the Indo-Pacific because of IPEF, because of our engagement with Singapore and the Philippines and Guam?
Absolutely, without a doubt.
And how important is the Japanese-Korean rapprochement that we have seen over the last 2 years?
Exceptionally important. I would argue that our individual alliances with Japan and Korea are stronger than they've ever been before. The fact that they have achieved this extraordinary rapprochement has led to an unprecedented strengthening of our trilateral relationship as well, which makes us all safer.
And I would note also that over the last 2 years, with real wages rising, with more than 13 million jobs created, with investments in infrastructure and industry, our economy is in relatively stronger shape relative to China, which is facing high youth unemployment and a huge debt crisis right now. The time to talk is when we have significant strength, and thanks to President Biden leadership, we do. I'm also hearing a real mischaracterization of trade as zero-sum. It's a common trope that somehow trade and the trade deficit implies weakness. I mean, I have a trade deficit with my grocery store. That doesn't mean that I'm weaker relative to Star Market. Ms. Kendler, does trade between the United States and large markets, does that lower costs for American consumers by driving down the cost of imports?
Yes, it does.
And would revoking trade with a large market like China, would that functionally be a sales tax that would disproportionately impact low-income Americans?
It could be characterized that way, yes.
Does access to the Chinese market allow U.S. industry to have standard setting and other soft power prerogatives?
It does. We're very engaged on standards activity.
Can it help prevent Chinese dominance of large internal markets in a way that would give them that standard setting and soft power?
We are very focused on that issue. Yes.
Does it give America incorporated scale economies, especially for high fixed cost, low marginal cost industries like biopharmaceuticals or semiconductors or telecom, so that we can invest more in R&D here?
Yes, that's the innovation point that I was making earlier, yes.
That's good to hear. Now, despite these benefits, do we have to be rigorous and disciplined in ensuring that we don't transfer dual-use technologies to the Chinese?
Absolutely. We're critically focused on protecting our national security in dual-use tech transfers.
And just for the record, you do care about doing that?
Deeply, sir.
Good. It's all well and good to try to impair the transfer of dual-use technologies, but that just buys us time. Ultimately, we're going to have to outcompete and out-innovate the Chinese economy. I was very heartened to see that in the Republicans' China Task Force report from last Congress, it recommended a doubling of basic R&D funding. Bravo, I agree. I have been disheartened to see, though, in these appropriations bills coming from the 118th Congress that the GOP-led Appropriations Committee is cutting funding for science. Dr. Ratner, is underinvesting in basic research ultimately going to impair technology and its applications to military might?
Congressman, we certainly support strong research dollars, and the department's budget request has the largest request for research and development ever.
Yeah, if we cut science, we will not win. I yield back.